back again right before spring break. I've got 2 more standards left, and I'm trying to do something here. I'm trying to show why we might need to have some inclusion of diverse perspectives in schools, because maybe there might be a little something missing from our curriculum that is state mandated, not federal, state mandated. And so federal tax dollars, maybe they shouldn't be withheld from schools. Well, let's keep going. We've done our first 3 standards. Our 4th standard is talking about pretty much what happens around the country, because I'm a U.S. history teacher, from roughly 1962 to 1929. So this is like the rest of Reconstruction plus all the way through the Roaring 20s. So let's go. Reconstruction is taught briefly. There's not a whole lot of emphasis on it, as I mentioned earlier, but there is a little bit in there. We do talk about the setup of the Freedmen's Bureau, as well as the sharecropping system, which kept all Southerners who were poor, which was a majority of them, in systemic poverty for generations. And in fact, in a lot of places in the, especially the Southeast, you can still see the impacts of that even today. Eurocentric focus, we have the black codes along with the convict lease system. It's exactly what it sounds like. Definitely not a positive, diverse thing. We have the rise of hate groups and terrorist groups like the KKK. We have violent massacres that caused the end of Reconstruction. So there's all of that in there. We do have an emphasis on the Constitution of during Reconstruction, as well as some of the leaders of that movement, and it does focus on African American advancements during that time, because in my state, Reconstruction was the time when our government was the most diverse it has ever been, period. There's also mention of some women's rights activity, and that's about where it ends. We pick up in the Jim Crow era, where we talk about different methods of disenfranchisement that were rampant at the time. We talk about Plessy versus Ferguson making segregation legal, like codifying it. Eurocentric focus. We talk about the new constitution of my state, which codified discrimination. Eurocentric lens. Talk about how there was a depression during that time period, and that led to the rise of mills in the South and all of the things surrounding that. So we have child labor, we have the labor unions, and essentially how they were not good and how it's good to be a right to work state. And that's going to go into the Eurocentric focus, because in the southern states, because of segregation, African American people were not allowed to work in mills. They were only allowed to have agricultural jobs. There were a couple of land-grant colleges that were established during this time, and because of segregation, you did have to have a separate facility for different races. So I guess both-ish. But the guy who did it in my state was a real booger. It's the best I got. And he led to a reign of violence, terror, and a mass amount of lynchings against African American people in my state. So I'm going to take that and put that in the Eurocentric category as well. Then we have populism and all the things associated with that. Populism in a lot of other places was more based on being farmers, but in the southern states, where the farmers associations tended to, or the farmers alliances tended to be segregated, a lot more of the focus was placed on white farmers. So kind of both, leaning towards Eurocentric. We have the Great Migration and how that really focused on African American people moving from the South for the first time. That led into the Progressive era, where we have the muckrakers, we have labor unions, but that also leads into the convict lease system, as well as discrimination in employment. We do have political corruption in there. Great. And then we have the temperance and prohibition movement. Then that does kind of leave some room for advancement of disenfranchised groups. You do have women's suffrage kind of tied to that. It wasn't really like in exactly the movement, but it was tied to it. And then we also have the activism of different African American people, including the NAACP. Then you have the viewpoints, kind of the conflicting viewpoints of W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington. So that's in there. It's good. Not great, but good. And then we move into the World War I era, which is what ended the progressive time period. And in this particular front, we talk about a little bit about foreign policy, and it typically is our foreign policy with European nations, so definitely a European lens on that one. We talk about the increase in military spending. Again, the military was highly segregated this time, and African American soldiers received less pay and segregation. But you do see the economy start to spike a little bit in the United States just due to their particular geographic placement during the time period and the fact that they stayed out of war until almost the end of it. But we talk about the Zimmerman telegram. We talk about unrestricted submarine warfare. We talk about how our state had a Council of Defense that was very intent on making sure people were following the nationalism line, and how the Sedition Act was in full swing here. We talk about how the farmers in particular do very, very well during this time period, and how we start to see folks actually being able to save money for the first time. We see an uptick in textile production because of the war effort. We also see when the war ends, some folks coming home and actually having money. So you see a little bit of the Roaring 20s. However, that does start to dip, especially for Southerners, and we start to see more of a consumer culture picking up because the money that they had at the beginning of this era ran out very quickly because demand decreased a bunch. We do get to talk about the Southern Literary Renaissance as well as the Harlem Renaissance. I talk about it more than I probably have to, but I enjoy that stuff, so that's about it. Come back for the last one.